Imagine forcing a few 100,000 people to live shoulder to shoulder in a sealed underground bunker for their entire lives. No windows, no exit for months at a time. Now imagine none of them are allowed to leave to use the bathroom. By any reasonable law of biology, that bunker should be a disaster zone, a slurry of waste, a paradise for bacteria, a death trap. And yet, inside the tunnels of an ant colony, something strange happens instead. The waste disappears. Corpses vanish. The nest stays, by any measurable standard, clean. For a long time, nobody knew where it was all going. Ants are famous architects, famous farmers, famous soldiers, but almost no one had bothered to ask the most basic question of civilization. Where does an ant empire put its sewage? The answer turns out to be stranger than anyone expected, and it starts with a very simple experiment. In 2015, researchers at the University of Regensburg gave black garden ants sugar water dyed bright red or blue and waited. For weeks, nothing. Then, in the corners of their plaster nests, dark patches began to bloom, the exact color of whatever dye the colony had been drinking. The ants weren't dumping food or hauling out their dead in these spots, they were doing something else entirely. They had built a bathroom, and every ant in the colony was using it. That single discovery cracked open a much bigger picture. Ant colonies aren't just nests, they're small, ruthless civilizations, and like every civilization, they eventually had to solve the same disgusting problem humans did. What do you do with hundreds of thousands of bodies producing waste in one place forever? Some species, it turns out, built indoor plumbing. The garden ants kept their toilets close, tucked into unused corners, visited again and again without any apparent fear or disgust. That's the confusing part. These are famously hygienic insects. They drag dead nestmates outside within hours. They groom each other constantly to strip away spores and bacteria. So why would they tolerate a pile of feces sitting quietly in a hallway? Nobody is entirely sure yet. One idea is that the waste isn't garbage at all, but a source of salt, of leftover nutrients, maybe even a kind of chemical signpost that tells the colony where it is. Another possibility is more unsettling. The smell might be doing work. Ants use scent to recognize family, and a shared toilet soaked in the whole colony's chemistry might act like a communal identity badge nobody can fake. But the strangest part of the story isn't the adults at all, it's the larvae. A larval ant doesn't have a working exit. Its gut is sealed shut at the back end, so nothing can leave. For its entire childhood, every scrap of waste it produces simply stays inside, accumulating with nowhere to go. So the larva does the only thing it can. It holds it, all of it, for weeks. Only when the larva finally stops eating and begins transforming into a pupa does the blockage finally open. In one single release, it expels everything it has been storing since birth, a dense, dark mass called a meconium, and workers immediately haul the packet away like a piece of biological waste, no different from any other. It's less a bathroom break than a lifetime of holding it, followed by one enormous, irreversible flush. Other species chose a completely different model of government. Leafcutter ants, the farmers of the insect world, don't tolerate waste indoors at all. Their colonies run on a fungus garden, fed with fresh chewed leaf pulp, and that garden produces enormous amounts of spent material, exhausted plant fiber, dead fungal threads, and everything the colony's own bodies leave behind. All of it gets hauled to a separate chamber outside the living quarters, a refuse dump that can hold as much biological danger as an entire hospital's worth of pathogens. And here is where the civilization metaphor turns dark. Someone has to work that dump. In a leafcutter colony, the job doesn't go to the youngest, strongest ants, it goes to the oldest. As a worker ages, her assignments creep steadily closer to the exits and steadily further from safety. Young ants tend the queen and nurse the larvae, deep in the safest chambers. Middle-aged workers forage outside, but the very oldest ants, the ones with the least time left to contribute, get reassigned to the two most hazardous jobs in the colony: undertaker duty, dragging out the dead, and dump duty, sealed away with the refuse. It's a brutally efficient system, and colonies that use it lose remarkably little. An older worker has already produced most of the value she ever will, so instead of holding her back, the colony spends what's left of her on the tasks most likely to expose her to spores, toxins, and disease. Biologists have a fittingly blunt name for the job: a conveyor belt, carrying each ant steadily to the most dangerous work she'll ever do. Inside the dump chamber itself, the conditions are closer to chemical warfare than housekeeping. Fungal spores drift through the air. Toxic byproducts from decomposing plant matter build up in the confined space. Even the friendly fungus the colony depends on turns hostile once it's discarded, releasing compounds that can sicken or kill an ant that lingers too long. Dump workers who spend their days there simply don't live as long as their nestmates elsewhere in the colony. The job is, in the most literal sense, fatal by design, and the colony accepts that loss as the cost of keeping everyone else alive. Not every species even has the luxury of a permanent dump. Some desert ants live in barren, sun-scorched terrain where there's no convenient midden to build. Red honeypot ants in central Australia solve this by walking their waste far from the nest entrance, out into open ground, dropping it and returning empty-handed. Naive ants stumble through this at first, wandering, scanning, wasting energy. But with repetition, individual workers learn efficient routes and begin returning to the same general direction trip after trip, essentially inventing their own private waste route through empty desert. A colony without written records, without maps, still manages to keep its garbage collection running on memory alone. So the picture that emerges isn't one bathroom habit, it's several competing forms of government, each solving the same crisis of crowded living in its own way. One species tucks its toilet quietly into a spare room and keeps living beside it. Another builds a walled-off quarantine zone for its refuse and staffs it with workers who have nothing left to lose. A third sends its oldest citizens on a long, memorized walk into the desert, over and over, until the job simply becomes muscle memory. None of it looks like a decision exactly. No ant ever votes on sanitation policy, but across millions of years, colonies that failed to solve this problem collapsed under their own filth, and colonies that solved it kept growing. What's left today, walking under our feet, is generation after generation of the survivors, entire underground societies quietly running one of the oldest and least glamorous branches of civilization there is, waste management, and doing it mostly without a single mistake we'd notice. We built sewers, landfills, and garbage trucks to solve the exact same problem. Ants got there first, and they didn't need a single blueprint to do it.